Guys, my name's Daniel, and I am clearly a beekeeper. And I think what we're here to talk about today, what Sasha had asked me to come out and discuss, was really just the nature of the program out here, going on with the 12 hives that you guys are all familiar with, and how that relates to all the work and presentation that goes on back of house, front of house, the whole nine yards, the bounty, and everything. Because it's really a spectacular program, and I kind of just want to talk about it because it's really actually huge and it's really cool, a lot cooler than what meets the eye. And I think what we should start out with is kind of the history of the whole thing here in Salish with me and the honeybees. And I always get a kick out of it every time I go to what is it down there, the gift shop? The Falls gift shop? When we first started doing this, the plan was to put 2 hives on top of the Falls gift shop right next to the exhaust tank. And of course, everyone who worked there just thought that was the worst idea ever. But I thought it was sort of a good idea, and I was willing to try it because I'll try, I don't care, let's see if it works. And, sorry, right at the last minute, I don't know how to turn this down, it's a brand new phone. We'll just pretend it doesn't happen. But right at the last minute, I was snooping around, this is years ago, and I found the pickleball court up here, and there was nothing in there. It was completely derelict, full of leaves and just muck and everything. And I said, hey, maybe this is a better spot to put honeybees as opposed to the roof, where they might, come down the old vents. So that's what we did. We put 4 hives up there, and there was no garden. It was just pretty much kind of sort of a wasteland up there, I guess, for lack of a better word, because nothing was done with it, at the time.
How long ago was that?
I don't really.
3 years ago?
3 or 4? Was it 3?
3 or 4 years.
Yeah. Something like that. It's right in there, yeah. I should know.
I've been here 4.
I don't remember.
After I got here.
What's that?
I've been here 4, and I think it was a year after I got here.
Yeah, it just started right when I got here.
Yeah, it's something like that, yeah. So it was really, really cool. I mean, no one was really doing it at the time. And we didn't know what was going to happen with the bees, what was going to happen with the honey. No one knew anything, so we're all just sort of winging it and saying, man, this is kind of a neat little frontier for, the whole farm to table type thing, which back then wasn't even that big of a deal as it is now. And in that first year, someone knocked him over, and someone else shot a flaming arrow into them, and one of them caught on fire. And it was really, really crazy because that's just what was going on, and I had never done anything like this so publicly. Of course, I'd kept bees before this, but I'd never been in, we've never done it like this, where there's a lot of availability to the public just come out there. And so the learning curve was pretty steep, but we just kept working at it and making it better and better and better. And as the time went by and the demands of the lodge began to increase, and we began to really kind of look at the kind of honey we're producing and how we could make a better honey. And that's when Rod installed that incredible garden up there, the herb, all the herb planters and all that stuff. And that made a really big difference in how the honey tastes and what their profile was. Then I started thinking, gosh, I think we're in our 3rd year now at TPC. I just started my 3rd season over there. Because really you sort of had this thing going on where it's like, we need this honey and we need to do this stuff and we want to have this local component to our menus, but how do we produce that? And it just was like, I don't know, let's go to TPC. And so if you look, I think you can see it. I call it the bee line. Just below the 12th hole, there's a clear cut, and it can shoot straight to the falls. You can see it. You can see the lodge. You can see everything. It's really kind of a cool thing. You're all the way over there, just across the river. There's some beehives, and then we're putting more on the 17th hole. So we have this really cool component where there's bees up here producing honey. There's bees over there producing honey, and I started building a bigger collection of beehives in this area to support what you guys are doing out here. So I just came from Raging River, and as soon as we're done, I'm going to go get a bunch of honey from some hives out there that did really, really well this spring. And just over Tiger Mountain, there's a ton. And so that's it's a really interesting story to see how it started with 4 hives, and now you sort of have the flagship 12 hive apiary up here turn into this really big supportive network, a fleet of sorts to support everything. And when you take all that and you guys get a hold of it and do your thing, I think what you have have is really a remarkable story. You never hear about it. You know what I mean? It's just a really cool thing that's going on up here.
How many do you have up at the golf course? How many hives?
We have 2 right now. We're going to put, probably Monday or Tuesday, I'm going to dump 4 more. So we'll have 6.
How many total?
What's that?
How many total?
Total where?
Hives, just your golf course.
Just for this, you know, there's never a solid number because I'm always moving stuff. So typically what I do out here is right now it's low. Right now there's probably 80, 85, somewhere in there. And then we'll bump that up in another month. That's just, I won't double that, of course, by any means. But we'll get to like 110, I would imagine, somewhere in there.
Why do you move them around?
I move them around because honeybees are, you have to be able to, it's kind of like serving. You have to anticipate the needs of the guests and all this stuff. You have to anticipate the needs of the honeybee before they decide that they're going to take over. And so I move my honeybees around to take advantage of pollination opportunities for them, and also in this environment, because you have to, if the guy down the street, you notice us spraying a bunch of trees, get your bees out of there, man, go. And I try to pay attention to what's going on, so I'm always able to just move hives around. We'll move 20 or 30 at a time, something like that.
How do you move them?
Put them in a truck and move them.
Pick them up.
Mhm. Yeah,
How many bees per hive?
depends on the time of year. So right now we're probably, it's tough, man. I just was in a hive with hundreds of thousands of them just like 20 minutes ago, you know. And then there's others that are really, really weak. That's another reason you move them. When they're weak, you want to join them with other ones and things like that, you know. So
Do you know, do we get all of our honey from these hives, or do we supplement from something else?
I wouldn't have any. I have no idea. What I'm acutely, intimately aware of is what I provide you with in terms of just the honey that comes from this region. I couldn't speak to anything else because I'm not, you know, I'm my own guide. I would suspect that all of it would come from here, yeah. I can't imagine why.
How much honey are you bringing in?
I don't know.
Into the lodge, I think would be better.
What's that?
How much honey into the lodge are you bringing? Do you have a?
I don't ever track it. I don't track that.
Cool. So you bring 100 pounds in lodge, okay, you pay for 10 pounds of honey, that's great, thanks.
No, there's accounting that takes place, and what my specialty is just the beekeeping. So on my end, I've got people that do all the paperwork and all the administrative stuff, and I know it sounds kind of silly, but I really don't pay attention to it. I don't build invoices, I don't do the tracking. I just, when the orders come in, I'm told on my end at our office, okay, you know, we need to take 5 pounds of honey to Chicopolis to make the chocolates, which is about what they go through here, stuff like that. I think the thing with the honey is it's really kind of surprising how little honey goes such a long way. So like the chocolates, for example. You know, I mean, you're talking, I don't know, maybe 5 pounds a year, maybe. You know, the popcorn thing is minimal. And so there's a lot of these projects that might look like it consumes a ton of honey, but the reality is it doesn't, just because it goes such a long way.
How much honey does a hive produce? How much would you get out of it?
It's going to all be relative to, this is, and the TPC thing is a great example. It's all relative to where the hives are, and it's strange because up here, you can't produce whole comb honey. I don't know why. It doesn't work. I've tried and tried and tried and tried. I can produce whole comb honey anywhere else. Right across the river, though, I can do whole comb honey. And so each hive is, it's really interesting because each hive has its own sort of abilities. I've got a bunch of hives down in Raging River that haven't produced honey, but they produce other things for me. You know what I mean? And then hives right down the river from them produce a ton of honey. So it's kind of all relative, and that's another reason why you move them and try to be attuned to what the needs of the honeybees are. Because at the end of the day, of course, I want them to produce honey. You know. And
Do pollen or propolis?
I don't do pollen, and here's why. Pollen is probably the most lucrative market in anything anyone could do in beekeeping. can't bring myself to do it. The harvesting of pollen is when you take an actual apparatus, a wooden box, and it's got these little asterisk-shaped cuts in it. And the honeybees, you effectively seal off the entrance of their hive with this box, and all they can do is barely fit through these little asterisk-size, or shaped holes. And it's just big enough to fit the honeybee through, and all the pollen that's on the basket sloughs off. And so even the most hardcore pollen harvesters, if you leave it on for more than 3 days, you'll kill the entire hive. So it's like if someone's at your front door jacking you through your groceries every single time you come home from the store. You know what I mean? So pollen is kind of a neat thing, but I can't bring myself to do it. I like my bees too much. So, but we do harvest propolis, and the propolis is kind of a neat component because that's a resin that the honeybees collect from the trees. They mix it with their beeswax, and then they use it to seal up everything inside the hive. And you can tincture that, and you can do all kinds of stuff with that. But it's kind of a neat health thing that I'm into right now.
Is it true that the bee pollen helps with allergies?
It is. It really is true. But my take on that just being, the kind of beekeeper that I am, the pollen helps, but so does the honey because the honey's from the pollen. So it's everyone always wants me to do pollen, and sometimes, like in the middle of winter, when there's nothing going on, I say, okay, I'm doing pollen this year. It's gonna happen. We're gonna make it happen. And then you get time to do it, like right now. And I can't do it. I'm not gonna do it. So.
We have guests ask all the time, like, what steps are taken in terms of, they always say they've read about issues with bees dying. Talk about that a little bit.
The interesting thing, there's the queen in her peak production, which is coming up here with this weather. It's going to be soon. She's laying 2,000 eggs a day. So the lifespan, that's a 9-day hatch, I guess is what you call it. And so every 9 days, 2,000 new honeybees out of a healthy hive are going to hatch. Now, think about every day if she's laying that amount. So that sort of begins to lend itself to the question, well, what do you do with a population that big? And that's where the life cycle of the honeybee becomes so fascinating, because in the peak summer season, when she's doing that, the honeybee only has 3 weeks to live. And so the honeybees that are born right now are going to make it a month. We get into deeper summer, it's going to be 3 weeks, and then as you go into fall, their lifespan increases because they're not busy flying so much, they're more doing the work that goes on inside the hive and getting ready for winter. And your final clutch that she lays, I don't think clutch is the right word, but that's the word I use. The final clutch that she lays, like in October and end of September, those are the bees that are going to carry the colony through the winter. And so they'll curate the interior of the hive all the way until the weather starts up again. In this case, this year, it was like February, So that's why as soon as we're done, I'm going to go harvest a ton of honey, which is insane. But yeah, so it's all about the health of the queen, to determine the lifespan of the honeybee. And folks they'll go to a beehive and they'll see what they think is a huge collection of dead bees on the outside of the hive. And the good beekeepers probably sweep those up, which we try to do. But it's actually pretty normal. It's totally normal. And so the honeybees also, inside the hive, when a honeybee dies inside the hive, the honeybees will actually take that dead bee and they'll fly it out of the hive and drop it out in front. So it's really this pretty big collection of stuff that's going on to contribute to what the dead bees are. As far as colony collapse disorder, which I think is probably a pretty popular question. That's a pretty wild deal. I remember the first time it happened to me, and I was devastated. It was years ago, I think 6 years ago maybe, and it just blew my mind that a hive that had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of bees in it, 1 week, could be completely not dead, not there, just gone, like totally gone. And it just blew my mind that was even possible, and it really kind of offended me. really serious, let's go get a drink, and let's try to figure this out, okay? And of course, there's no answer. And then it happened again, and I realized that not only did I not know anything, but no one else knew anything, and it just seemed apparent to me that it's just going to happen and happen until I don't have any bees left. You know, now that wasn't realistic, but it was new to me then. So of course, it's like the first time I saw one of the varroa mites, you know, the mite that destroys the honeybee hive. Man, I thought it was over. I saw one little mite, and I couldn't believe it, and I thought, this is the end of the world. It's over with for me. But you sort of work your way through these things, and what I decided to do with my disappearing honeybee issues was for every hive I lost, I would make 2 hives. And so I started looking at how to compress beehives and how to manage beehives in a way that I can make more beehives and more and more and more and more without spending a bunch of money to go buy, you know, your starter kits that happen this time of year. So I got really good at swarm control and swarm management, and as my colony collapse issues didn't increase but sort of stayed, you know, somewhat on the forefront of things, I just was like, you know, screw it, man. For every tree I cut, I'm going to plant 5, that kind of mentality. And before you knew it, you got a ton of hives. You know, I haven't seen it happen in a number of years to me, but it's obviously a serious deal. You know, and I don't really know what that's about. I'm not sure. But I know that, it's like I was saying earlier, I pay really close attention to what's going on around all my bee yards, all my apiaries. I really try to look. And you don't go door to door and talk to the neighbors, but you look for the trucks that are running around, and you kind of get an idea of who's doing what in the neighborhood. And if there's anything that I think is stupid happening, I'll pull my bees, and we're gone for like 2 weeks before we come back. You know, just to try to protect them. So I think there's a lot of you know, the Monsantos and all this stuff that's going on. There's a lot of sort of media vitriol, I think would be the right thing to look at that as, is to, you know, these grand villains that are doing all these terrible things. And it's really easy to sit on the internet at night and buy into all that. But I really think, as cliche as it sounds, because, you know, I live this, I think that it just happens on a local level. I really do. I truly believe it. I think you have to have a local level of awareness and sort of kick that stuff you read on the internet out, you know, because you're not going to ever, people want their gardens, and people want everything that they have, and it takes Roundup to get some of that stuff. So it's up to the proper education of the public to really determine what's the right thing to do as an alternative. You know, I don't really think that it's ever going to go away. I think that we just have to find ways to outmaneuver it.
So what kind of things do you keep an eye out for?
I look for, I mean, the biggest red flag you can ever, I will have, like, I won't even really, it's kind of a shoot first, ask later. If I see a weed control or a spray truck, big time, man, I'm gone. I'm taking my ball and I'm going home, you know? And then when I'm on the interstate and you see these pest control rigs, you know, I got my big honey truck, but it's obvious I'm a beekeeper, and I'll just pace them for like 2 miles, make sure they have to look at my truck, you know. So, because they shouldn't be spraying for bugs. You need all the bugs we can get, but that's just another, I'm totally stupid, I'm a child, but that's okay because I enjoy doing that kind of thing. It makes them very uncomfortable. So, yeah.
There was a piece in NPR about that colony collapse, and they said that the bees don't even find their way back to the hives. And they actually have some research that those Africanized killer bees that we were also afraid of in the 70s are mixing with the domestic bees, and it's actually making them hardier. And ironically, it could be the salvation of the bees. It's the bees.
I am a massive, and I shouldn't even say this because that thing is recording, but I am a massive proponent of Africanized honeybees. Now that said, that if I don't, there's no recorded case of Africanized honeybees in Washington, 100%. It just hasn't happened. And when it does happen, you can bet your boots that it's going to be all over the news because they're a hardcore honeybee. But Africanized honeybees are a hardier strain of bee. They're huge honey producers. They're complete animals when it comes to just production. They're just a production monster. And extremely territorial. So that's where you get these situations where, you know, the guy with the backhoe is digging up his garden and somewhere in Colorado, great guns, there's a nest of really upset honeybees and it takes them out, you know. And so it's tough, but it could be the case that Africanized honeybees.
How's their honey?
I don't know.
Kind of
Very
happy.
happy.
Hasn't happened. Tried to get me, didn't I? I know a lot about this for a guy saying I don't know much, but I think that the Africanized honeybee, I've run into some really aggressive beehives, and I don't certainly think that they were Africanized, but there is something when you work with honeybees long enough and you sort of, I mean, when you get to like what I do, I just live, eat, breathe honeybees. I wake up this time of year, and you learn to smell when you open up a hive. You can tell by the fragrance of the hive, the pheromone that they're emitting. It's super crazy to think about, but when you research pheromones and how the honeybee communicates, you can identify a pheromone that indicates the mood of the honeybee hive, the colony, and you can tell by the sound also. And there's really, seriously, it sort of is unnerving to listen to a really aggressive, angry beehive when you open it up, even for a seasoned veteran. It's a little, it takes me aback every time I hear it, and I do hear it. And so you're like, whoa, better be really cool here, because these bees aren't, you know, they're not happy. And that's when you start to, that's why, as a beekeeper, you've got to really be cognizant of all these things, because when a honeybee stings you, she deploys her stinger out of her abdomen, and there's a barb at the end of that, and that barb will actually stick. It'll set the hook, so to speak, inside wherever she stung you, and as she goes to fly away, she leaves after herself on you, and so she dies immediately. She's the only stinging creature, I would say, I guess, that does that. The rest, like the wasps and the hornets and all these things, they don't have that barb, so they can just sit and pepper you. So the honeybee's last defense, of course, is always the sting. Doesn't seem like that because they seem to come pretty quick when they do, but that's the fact. So when you do start managing these hives that are sort of emotional or really chippy, I think I don't want to get them too upset because they'll just go after me, and then all of a sudden I'm out 200 bees, you know. So
Do you do stuff up there that's interesting for the guests to come watch, or are you here a lot where they can go? Huge boo.
That would purely be that would 100% be a request from Rod for me to do that. I don't think that's a good idea. We've done it before, and it's always a good time, but you've got to really have complete control of the group that's up there, without them, of course, being uncomfortable or feeling like they're being controlled. The liability is pretty tremendous if someone up there decides they don't want to listen to what the beekeeper's saying and maybe go, you know, stick their finger in the front door of that hive. You know, so we've done a lot of harvest amounts up there. And if you guys have been here in years past, I mean, some of you guys are saying you've been here. You probably went up there when we had the big tent and all that stuff, and there's food. We did the harvest amounts, and that was a lot of fun. And then we did a really cool thing for a Microsoft Spouse program, I think, a couple years ago, and that was also neat. But it takes a lot of preparation to make sure that the honeybees are ready up there for the guests, you know. And so it's like we were talking about with the pheromones. If your pheromone isn't right around a honeybee, she's gonna know. And so
Kind of like a dog.
kind of like a dog, kind of like a horse, absolutely, absolutely. They're very intuitive, and so you want to really make sure that the people that are up there in truly close proximity to those beehives understand what's going on. In this case, when we've done it up there, I've always brought up, I don't know if you guys have seen the beehive in the gift shop over here, but I'll bring up a demo hive and we'll put it up there, and we'll have beeswax and propolis and stuff like that, and we'll do walkthroughs. But I would never open a hive, ever. It could be disastrous. Yeah. So, anyone else?
How different are mason bees from honeybees?
I should have a really good answer for you, but I don't, because mason bees are the major pollinators, but they don't produce any honey, and much to, I suppose my shame, I have never paid much attention to mason bees, simply because I'm enamored with the honeybee. Yeah. So, but, you know, I don't know. They're heavy-duty pollinators. Certainly up there with the honeybee themselves. They just don't produce anything. Well, I think they're kind of kitschy, kind of cute, that kind of thing.
Are those the big fat ones, the little bumblebees?
Those are the bumblebees.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the bumblebees. And the mason bees, though, are different. I think they look different. They have a different. I really, truly don't know much about them. And I gotta go home because people ask me that sometimes. And I always say the same thing. I don't know.
But honeybees are good pollinators too.
Massive pollinators. Honeybees, bats. So bats and honeybees are like the thing, man. So we build bat houses, and we're gonna put bat houses over there. We're gonna put bat houses up here, and it's just you gotta get all the pollination you can. But honeybees are incredible pollinators. They've got big pollen baskets on their hind legs, sorry. And they'll just go and they'll just collect. I mean, today I watch honeybees that could barely even walk in the hive because they're just so loaded down with pollen. Huge nubs on the back of their legs, and they're hairy, so they're all yellow and scotch weed. It's kind of cool. Yeah. So that's one of the things that I do that produces, or really the killer honey that you guys are able to experience, is we do a lot of small batch harvesting. So your common scenario would be to let the honey sit and sort of cook in the hive and ripen and all this stuff throughout the course of a few months, and then take everything at once. What I do is we pull small batch, small batch, small batch. It seems like it's a ton of work, and I suppose it is. It's not anymore because I do it so much, but by standard measure, we probably do 10 times the amount of work that we need to. But I want to get the honey, like, you know, the herb garden, or after a certain bloom closes, I don't let the nectar and the pollen collide with the incoming nectar. I yank it all, take everything. So where most guys will harvest like once or twice a year, we're going to harvest 5 times maybe, something like that. Instead of one huge haul, we make it a whole series of small hauls. And I think that on a production level, that's kind of good because you clear out. You can simply add more room in the beehive to give them places to store this stuff, but without really knowing the answer why, I think that what I've noticed is that it's more productive for the honeybees to have, instead of a huge stacked space, they have a smaller space, which is to continually regenerated room to dump their pollen loads and convert. So it's one of our little maneuvers that we like to do.
So we can tell our guests we have small batch honey?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sweet.
I thought you were.
Okay,
Yeah, man,
I
tell
didn't
them.
know that.
It's such a cool thing. I don't. I've got a huge hospitality background, and so I'm really familiar with hotels. And I think about it up here because what's going on up here doesn't happen. I'm telling you straight up, it doesn't happen. It's so cool to think that right across those falls, there's apiaries that then you can see them from we can't see them from the window, but you can, to support this. There's these up here. When you come here, you get a really sort of this insulated experience with this local food that no one else gets. And I think that as a guest, that's got to be the coolest thing you could ever. I think there's a lot of value to that. It excites me. It really does. I'll never be doing what you guys do. I'm just simply not cut for it anymore. But I think it's neat that I can help with that. It's truly small batch. It's all done by hand, and it's old school, and it's traditional, and it's almost a craft. It's like an art, and it's exciting to do it, And it's really exciting that no one else does it. It's a ton of work. I think it'd be hard to find someone to do it, but I just happen to enjoy it, So you guys, I'm pretty stoked about the whole thing. There's a lot of happy honeybees working big hours and pollinating the hell out of this valley. It's just crazy to think all what's flying around out here. I was out there on the phone, and I was talking to the person that manages all of my stuff, and there's honeybees just all over these little purple flowers. I don't know what they are, but I think it's cool that the bees do.
How far around do they pollinate?
There's a 5-mile forage zone, so let's talk about that. I'm super glad you asked me that question, because that brings up the most important thing of all for honey. There's a 5-mile forage zone for a honeybee who truly doesn't have anything going on, right? So they'll go up to 5 hive to find, some pollen or nectar. But more traditionally, typically you're going to see a 2-mile flight, to score. So that brings up the huge question that no one ever seems to, it's organic, the organic thing. I'm just going to say there's no such thing as organic honey. It's impossible. It really is. I know Trader Joe's, I always laugh because they've got their USDA grade A Mexican organic honey. I don't know how that's possible. It just doesn't make any sense. I took a picture of it and I still love that thing. With the forage zone that wide, and with so much going on, and the compression of just humanity in general, it's impossible to truly guarantee that one honeybee doesn't receive or get into a corrupted pollen source or nectar source somewhere in their travels and bring it back. It's truly impossible. And if we could all say, okay, look, man, this is organic, that's a big money word. I could retire after like 20 years of organic beekeeping, but it just isn't possible. And so I'm always I always am quick to correct folks who do pull the organic card on honey, because it just simply isn't so. Now, you can really be close to natural beekeeping and stuff. For example, as an example of that, I don't smoke my honeybees. I always have my smoker, and I use it as a super, super last resort. But over the years, I just stopped smoking because it's unhealthy for the bees. And I need to be a better beekeeper than relying on smoke to calm down my honeybees, because it's so disruptive to the beehive, the colony. So there's a lot of things that the savvy beekeeper can do to ensure that his bees are kept naturally and healthy and responsibly. But when you get into the organic game, it just doesn't exist. I wish it did, I really do. But I think it's important to try to fix that, because I see a lot of organic honey, and that's on the honey producer for him to deal with, or her. That's their thing that they got to leverage in their own head. But unfortunately, the consumer is only as good as what they're told, and that's an important thing. So it's not organic, and organic honey simply just, I think, is impossible.
So when you see like buckwheat honey or clover honey or whatever kind of honey, it's got to be mixed with wildflower along with that certain type.
Not necessarily.
If they have a 5-mile flight zone.
They have a 5-mile flight zone, but that would be sort of like if you got to make a beer run at midnight and your store is closed, but 2 miles down the road the other guy's open. You know what I mean? So they're only going to go as far as they have to go. You know what I mean? I think that with the buckwheats and the massive clover operations and stuff, like up in Canada, that's possibly, that's possibly something. But the things you get into when you start really talking about stuff like that is what happens is these huge honey producers will take their honey and they'll cut it. They're going to cut it with corn syrup. And so you'll take 1 pound of honey and then 2 pounds of corn syrup. And your high-grade honey now just tastes like regular honey from Safeway or whatever the case is. And that's how the game is played with those guys. That's why you go to Safeway or any store and you see the clover honey and stuff, and you look at the color and it's really, really dark, and it's been on the shelf forever. You know what I mean? It's not crystallized. There's no real signs of anything. The crystallization of the honey is the first thing to tell you that it's the real deal. The quicker that you see that, the more natural the honey is, because it hasn't been processed, it hasn't been cooked, and it hasn't been added anything. Nothing's been added to it. So the honey thing, when you get into those huge big time producers, I think is pretty sketchy. I think that's why it's important that people have their own honeybees. So those guys can, maybe not get so much business. If you look at the honey, you look at the viscosity, the clarity, you can smell it, the stuff that's in here. I think it's in here. There's a big difference between that and anything you're ever going to get from FSA or any other major purveyor that buys from these big Canadian outfits or the guys in Dakota and stuff like that.
If I had like a hive on like a quarter acre, like this is my house, would that be like, my wife's gonna say, oh, the bees are gonna sting the kids?
Oh, mine says the same thing.
And they leave them alone.
Well, black lab, and his thing is, he's just like, he shows up and shoves his nose right in the front door of the beehive.
Oh,
He just wants to
no.
hang out. He doesn't care. He's not very smart.
Tails wagging.
Yeah, big time. He's slobbering. It's gonna be fun. His buddies must be in there. He knows it because everyone knows him. And then he finds out we're not his friends, and he beats feet, man, and he runs. And my girl gets really upset, and I kind of snicker. I was upset when I first saw it, but it is never gonna work. So the thing is, if you're gonna do a beehive, the best thing to do is not do one, but do two. Because if something happens to one, because they are really, really delicate, and it's very easy for things to go awry super quickly. And if you have one, then there's not a backup stock to sort of help mend the other. And so I would recommend two. And with a quarter acre, you know, do 40. Go big. But no, two would be a great place to start. Yeah, two would be ideal.
You good for my garden?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What do you guys think about all this? Isn't that a bummer about the organic thing? I think about that a lot. It bums me out because everyone wants to be organic and everyone wants to support that theory and that idea and that lifestyle. And it's just so incredibly impossible with just the nature of humanity and the nature of the honeybee for those two things to be, tandem. And that's a shame. It really is.
Do they have to know when they put corn syrup? Because I buy it. You're gonna hate this. It's called. It's at French Line. It's like $3.
It's called.
All it says is honey from Brazil and
China.
some countries, but it doesn't say anything about corn syrup.
Well, no.
They're not.
Don't they have to mention corn syrup if it's in there?
No, I don't think so. It's not really regulated like that.
On the other hand, they don't say 100% pure honey.
Yeah.
That's true, yeah.
Right?
You know what, guys, I don't even look. I really don't. I saw that the last jar of honey I picked up at a store was the grade A Mexican organic. And I thought, that's really weird. It just, I gotta take a picture and send it to someone. LOL. It's crazy, man. The Chinese thing is really sort of the heart of it all. The Chinese, over in China, they're pollinating by hand. That's an actual industry. You can get a job with a little spoon, and you have to go. These people literally pollinate flowers because there's so much pollution. There's so much toxicity in the honeybees just can't breathe. Basically, is what it is. So the industry is this pollination thing, and what happens is, and I wish I need to go and look at this because it's a great story, and I don't have all the details, but I have the gist of it. It was, I don't know, 5 years ago, Port of Tacoma. Huge container ship shows up, and they got a bunch of honey, and it's all from China. And all of it's been washed, it's all scrubbed, the whole thing is just cut. So the USDA says, okay, well, you've got, 2 million tons of honey, or whatever the case is. It was a big amount. And we're going to check it out locally. So, which, fine, whatever. So they test it right there at the port, and they can't find a single qualifying component in any of this honey that even registers as a honey. I mean, none of it was all this contrived thing. And it was all headed up to Granite Falls. No, that's kind of weird. No, excuse me, I'm wrong. It's headed to Concrete, Washington, not Granite Falls. I get the two confused.
Close enough.
Concrete, Washington. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even make a difference, right? What a weird destination for that stuff to go. And so it makes what I do and ultimately what you guys are doing when you're translating this story to the guests, it makes it all the more important. Because what is that load of chemicals doing headed, labeled as honey, to Concrete, Washington? Isn't that insane? I mean, what do they do up there? I've been through that town. I can't imagine.
There's nothing.
I don't even know if there's a bar.
Are you being sarcastic?
No, I'm actually serious.
That area up there is probably one of the biggest producers of meth in the entire state of Washington.
Concrete.
There you go. Meth factory, Washington.
One of them.
How do you know that,
All
Michael?
this stuff is going on up there, and maybe that's part of the game. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
I live close to it, and I know people who.
Oh, you know people. It's
You were saying about the Chinese pollinating.
Yeah.
I listened to NPR too, and there was a story, just the other day, where they've gotten environment where the bees can come back, but they're finding that the people pollinating are doing a better job than the bees are. It's more efficient and they're getting better honey out of it. Yeah, that's, I've just heard a story, it's like last week.
Oh, we gotta have a job like in 10 years back here. Hand pollinating in Seattle. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really
We're
good.
excited to keep going with that, because it works better.
Yeah, interesting.
Well, it sounded like they were doing it in orchards and things like that.
Yeah,
Not
sure.
out in the wild. It wasn't out in the wild.
We're promoting you to that, Cody.
That's wild.
Our
It's just
pollinator.
crazy.
Our pollinator.
But you have to wear a bee
I
suit.
watched the film on that, and I just
With
thought
a
it was
vest.
completely nuts. You know, there's sort of a, I find a great sense of hope in the honeybee, and it's kind of neat because the world just moves quicker and quicker, and the honeybee just is here. And ultimately, man, it is up to us to make sure the honeybee is able to stay here, because we're the ones that are kind of messing it up for them. So we do have a responsibility, and the honeybee to me symbolizes hope. And I think it's really neat to watch what they do, not just here with the program that we have here, but everywhere else, you know, especially, you know, in the city. I have, in my own yard right now, I've got 35 hives, and that's completely insane, and I shouldn't do it, my wife says that. But I do, and it's cool to go out at night with a cocktail and just watch the honeybees come home. It's just really, really neat. And then at dawn, they fly back out. I was out there this morning with coffee, you know, 5 a.m., watching the bees wake up. It's just cool. So it's neat, man. It's exciting, and it's important where the honey goes. You know, the honey has to go to the right places, in my mind anyway. And you guys are part of a really spectacular program, you know, and I mean it. It really is. It's really, really neat. So kudos to all of you for helping out, seriously. Any other questions?
I had some people tell me the other day they were starting some hives and they were like flow hives or something like that.
Oh yeah, the old flow hive.
Like they're supposed to turn a
Man, those guys are in the weeds.
Is that a
Those-
good thing?
Those poor fellows, they started that out with a $70,000, I think, what's it called on Kickstarter, whatever, the limit or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
So they started giving 70 grand to make this happen, and now they're like 11 million in or something. You know, people just went nuts for that. Can you imagine what that would have been like to watch that thing climb and just the sinking desperation in your heart knowing you have to fill these orders globally?
What's the flow height?
It's a terrible, terrible product. It's just the worst thing. Because what it does, what the flow hive is it is a mechanized device that it's a beehive. It's a bee habitation, and it operates. The honey supers in the hive are all mechanized, and so instead of having the beekeeper get into the beehive and actually pull frame by frame, and I wish I've got a beehive here. I can show you guys what this is.
It's on tap.
Allegedly, but it's almost impossible. I think there's a bee in this suit. I think it just got stung. Anyway, the way this works is these plastic frames that sit inside this thing, the honeybee naturally produces beeswax off their abdomen. When they're first born, it's a biological imperative. I mean, they're going to produce it and they have to have a place to put it. This apparatus leaves very little space to put that beeswax. And instead of using beeswax to store the honey, it's an all-plastic foundation that splits with this crank. And that releases the honey that is supposed to be stored. And that comes out of a valve, and everyone, you know, has each other. It's all fun. It's completely, you know, it is such a disgrace, in my opinion. And I do feel bad for the guys that built it, because I don't think they ever wanted to be at $11 million, and I know they're backordered into next year, and that's that. However, when you have, every beekeeper has a responsibility to his beehives and to his honeybees, and you have to understand what it is to be in that hive, and to manage the honeybees, and to know their sense of the honeybees, and the sounds, and everything. It's a really almost intimate experience, and in a natural way. And that device, I think, just strips everything out. And I think that device is, long term, the worst thing that could happen to just overall pollination, overall just building them an awesome house and convincing them this is the best place for you to be. You guys need to stay here, and you just got to keep them as long as you can, you know. And so the flow hive is sort of a disappointment, you know, and it'll play out, of course, next year. You know, I could be all wrong, but I watched it closely since before, and it just doesn't seem like a healthy, responsible way to keep honeybees. You know, it would be, it's like if we're all honeybees and this is that hive and someone just turns a crank and we just get crushed against the wall. It's the honey
So it
torch.
kills all the bees too?
Doesn't kill all of them, but whatever's sitting around in there. And I can tell you that you have to have a really compact space for honeybees. You can't have the inner workings of a beehive have to be expertly managed. You cannot have too much room. You can't have too little room. If you have too little room, then the honeybees very democratically decide we're out of here. This sucks. We're gone. They swarm. If you have too much room, you create too much draft, and then the honeybees experience low temperatures and ultimately perish or swarm. So it's not a good thing. You know, you have to, if you're going to keep bees, you've got to keep bees. You've got to do it the right way. It's just a free lunch, and it's not even much for lunch. I don't think it's worth it. So I hope, I don't want to see those guys, you know, go down, but I do feel bad for them. You know, I really do. I would just be approached if I was responsible for $11 million worth of a terrible product. I would really be like, man, I wish I would have never logged into go to GoFundMe or whatever that is.
Kickstarter or GoFundMe.
Hey, anyway.
Do you taste a big difference between the different kinds of honey?
Yeah. Not everyone can. It is a palate, you know, and I think that the more familiar you are with truly well-prepared food, with fine ingredients, of course, now there's a big difference between like my honey and the stuff from Safeway or Fairmart. You can taste that immediately, but you can really begin to identify profiles in the honey based on what the honeybees are collecting. So you can have a sage honey that tastes it's really thick, it's too much for me, but you can definitely taste the sage. You can influence your honey with mint, you know what I mean? The blackberry honey is always a little darker and not as sweet as the raspberry honey, and I can taste that. And then you can taste wildflower honey, which is really just a conglomeration of whatever's going on in between nectaries. You know, maple honey is pretty fascinating. It doesn't taste like maple, but it's really light and it's sweet, and it's just an interesting honey. Yeah.
What are some of the common flavors on your honey then?
Really, blackberry is a big one, and then the raspberry is fairly good, but the raspberry is kind of mixed with the blueberries that are over here. And then the wildflower is really the three big ones. And it's interesting because of all the herbs that are going on up here. That's a really kind of a cool thing up there that you guys built. That's unusual. And so I think there's pear. There's all kinds of neat little things up there that add to the profile of the honey overall.
Is there a shelf life to honey?
No, there's not. It'll crystallize really quickly. You never want to, the natural raw honey that you guys use up here is 100%. I pull it straight from the hive and I filter it, but it's not cooked out, it's not pasteurized. So a lot of folks, if they don't want to experience the crystallization component to their honey, then they'll pasteurize it out above 132 degrees, I think is the actual temperature. And that'll kill all the enzymes, that'll just knock everything out of it, and boom, your honey will stay on the shelf for years. But the raw natural honey will always crystallize quicker, and that's just because it's almost like a living thing, you know. And when it crystallizes, all you do is you put it in a really gentle, warm bath, and it just resuscitates itself. Strain that through a cheesecloth, and take those crystals and put them in a butter and put it on your toast. It's really, really good. Honey crystals are pretty tasty. I like crunchy, half crystallized honey. I always intentionally put mine in the fridge to get it nice and. People think that, you know, oh, you're ruining the honey, but you're not. It's the skill. It's incredible. Anything else? that's